My wealthy spouse branded me barren before the entire courthouse. His aim, to nullify our bond and protect his vast fortune. He declared a stipulation meant I'd be penniless if we separated. I kept my composure, then gently passed a document to the judge. The contents unveiling utterly floored everyone attending. Can you imagine standing in a courtroom, staring at your millionaire husband, as he looks you dead in the eye and calls you sterile? Claims you're defective, incapable of having children, all to annul your marriage and leave you with absolutely nothing? Well, that was my reality. But what he didn't know was that I had an envelope in my hand, and inside it was a truth so explosive it would shatter his carefully constructed world. My name is Summer, and I'm 32, and yes, my husband, my soon-to-be ex-husband, Christian, just stood there in his $1,000 suit, playing the devastated victim, while his lawyer pulled out documents, trying to prove my infertility violated our prenup. The gallery was eating it up. The judge looked sympathetic. And me, I just smiled. You'll definitely want to stick around for what happened next. Let me rewind 3 years to show you how I ended up married to a complete fraud. Picture this. I was an events coordinator at a swanky Manhattan boutique hotel. And then Christian Morrison walked into my life like something out of a romance novel. 6'2", salt and pepper hair, blue eyes that could melt glaciers, and a smile that probably cost more than my car. He was planning his company's annual gala, and lucky me, I got assigned to make his every wish come true. I need this to be perfect, he told me, leaning across my desk, those intense eyes locking onto mine. Money is no object. Famous last words, right? But back then, I was completely dazzled. He sent flowers to my tiny studio apartment every day for a week. He took me to restaurants where the waiters knew his name, and the wine cost more than my monthly rent. When he proposed on his penthouse balcony overlooking Central Park with a ring that could have funded a small country, I thought I'd won the relationship lottery. The wedding was straight out of a fairy tale. Designer dress, celebrity planner, a guest list that read like Forbes magazine. His mother, Elena, flew in from California wearing enough jewelry to stock Tiffany's. His business partner, Marcus, gave this touching toast about friendship and success. I truly felt like Cinderella, finally getting her happily ever after. But fairy tales don't prepare you for what happens when the clock strikes midnight and your prince turns back into a frog. Actually, that's unfair to frogs. At least frogs are honest about what they are. The first red flag should have been our honeymoon in Tuscany. We were staying at this incredible villa with vineyard views that stretched for miles, and I was practically glowing with newlywed bliss. Christian, I said over breakfast on our private terrace, I've been thinking about starting a family. Maybe we could start trying when we get back? His espresso cup paused halfway to his lips, like I just suggested we sacrifice a goat. That's wonderful, darling. But let's not rush into anything. We should enjoy being married first. Reasonable, right? Except enjoying being married apparently meant Christian working 16-hour days while I decorated our penthouse and planned dinner parties for his business associates. Every time I brought up children, he had another excuse ready, like he'd been practicing in the mirror. The company was expanding. The market was volatile. He wanted to take me to Paris first, or Tokyo, or Mars, wherever he could think of to change the subject. But those trips, they were absolutely perfect. Christian would transform back into Prince Charming. He'd hold my hand as we toured the Louvre, kiss me on the Brooklyn Bridge at sunset, post romantic photos on social media with captions about his beautiful wife. His followers ate it up, commenting about relationship goals and asking when we'd have little ones. If only they could see us behind closed doors, where my husband treated me like expensive furniture. Beautiful to look at, but not particularly functional. The moment we'd return from any trip, Christian would disappear faster than my hopes for our marriage. His office became his sanctuary, the gym his second home, and our bedroom felt like a museum, beautiful, but completely untouchable. When I tried to initiate any kind of intimacy, he'd suddenly remember an urgent email that required his immediate attention. Because apparently market fluctuations can't wait for your wife to feel loved. I started making excuses for him, like it was my part-time job. Successful men have demanding schedules, I told myself. He's building an empire, and that takes sacrifice. But late at night, staring at the ceiling of our king-sized bed while he slept with his back to me, I couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental was wrong. And by something, I mean everything. My friend Rachel, a nurse who'd known me since college, was the first person to call out the obvious. "Summer, you look exhausted," she said during one of our monthly brunches, studying my face like I was one of her patients. When's the last time you and Christian had a real conversation? We talk all the time, I protested, but even I could hear how hollow that sounded. It was like saying we breathed the same air, so obviously we were communicating. About what? His work? Your social calendar? When's the last time he asked how you're feeling about anything that actually matters to you? I couldn't answer because I couldn't remember. Christian had mastered the art of conversation without actually communicating, like a politician, but with better hair and worse intentions. He'd ask about my day while scrolling through his phone. He'd compliment my appearance for public consumption, but in private, I might as well have been wallpaper. The breaking point came on our second anniversary. I'd planned this romantic evening, his favorite restaurant, a bottle of wine we'd shared on our wedding night, a Langelis that cost more than most people's mortgage payments. I wanted to feel connected to my husband again, to remember why we'd fallen in love in the first place. Christian came home 3 hours late. "Sorry, darling," he said, loosening his tie without actually looking at me. Marcus and I were reviewing quarterly projections, and you know how time flies when you're discussing expansion strategies. There I was, standing in our living room, wearing a dress that hugged every curve, makeup perfect, hope dying a slow and painful death in my chest. "Christian, it's our anniversary." He paused with that deer-in-headlights look before his practiced smile slid into place. "Of course it is." How thoughtless of me. Let me just shower, and we can order takeout from that Thai place you like. Takeout on our anniversary, while I stood there, dressed for seduction, feeling like the world's most expensive fool. That night, I made a decision that would change everything. While Christian showered, claiming he needed to wash off the stress of his day, because apparently stress is something you can scrub away with expensive soap, I picked up his phone. I know snooping is wrong, but desperate times call for desperate measures, and I was drowning in my own marriage. His text messages were surprisingly innocent. Business conversations with Marcus, scheduling with his assistant, the usual boring corporate communications. No secret affairs, no steamy exchanges with mysterious women. If anything, his digital life was as sterile as our relationship. How fitting. But something nagged at me. The way he and Marcus texted felt different. Comfortable in a way that Christian never seemed with me anymore. They had inside jokes, shared references, and easy intimacy that I envied. It was like watching two people who actually liked each other, which was a foreign concept in my marriage. You know what they say about curiosity in cats? Well, this cat was about to discover some very interesting information, and I was definitely going to survive to tell about it. Take Marcus, for example. Christian's business partner, best friend since college, and the man who seemed to know my husband's schedule better than his own wife did. They'd roomed together at Harvard, started their investment firm right after graduation. And somehow Marcus was always around. Always invited to our dinner parties. Always joining us for holidays. Always the third wheel, who never actually felt like a third wheel. More like I was the third wheel in their perfectly choreographed friendship. I started paying attention to things I'd previously ignored because I was too busy playing the perfect wife. The way Christian's entire demeanor would change when Marcus walked into a room, suddenly animated, genuinely laughing, more alive than I'd seen him in months. The way they'd stand just a little too close during business discussions, their conversations flowing with an ease that made me feel like an outsider in my own home. "Marcus is coming for Thanksgiving," Christian announced one evening in November, not asking but informing me like I was his secretary. "Of course he is," I replied, not bothering to hide my sarcasm. Would it be a holiday without Marcus? Should I set a place for him at our anniversary dinner too? Oh, wait. We don't have those anymore. Christian shot me a sharp look. He's family, Summer. You know he doesn't have anywhere else to go. Family. Interesting choice of words, considering Marcus had parents in Connecticut and a sister in Boston. But apparently our dinner table was where he belonged for every major holiday. I was starting to feel like the unwanted guest at my own celebrations, which is quite an achievement when you're paying for the turkey. But instead of starting another fight that would go nowhere, I decided to play detective. During Christmas dinner, I watched them like I was studying for the most important exam of my life. The shared glances. The way Marcus could make Christian laugh with just a raised eyebrow. The comfortable silence between them that spoke volumes. When Marcus complimented the dinner I'd spent all day preparing, Christian beamed with pride as if he'd cooked it himself. Here's something fun. Have you ever watched two people who are clearly in love try to pretend they're just friends? It's like watching a badly acted play where everyone's forgotten their lines but keeps going anyway. After the holidays, I made a discovery that sent my world spinning off its axis. Christian had forgotten to lock his home office safe, something that never happened because my husband was more obsessive about security than the Pentagon. He kept important documents in there, property deeds, investment portfolios, insurance policies, and apparently life-changing secrets. I knew I shouldn't look. I knew I was crossing about 17 different lines. But my marriage was already broken, and I needed to understand why I was living with a stranger who happened to share my last name. Most of the contents were exactly what you'd expect: legal documents, financial records, business contracts. But tucked between his property deeds and his life insurance policy, like some kind of twisted Christmas present, I found a manila envelope with a medical clinic's logo. The letterhead read, Metropolitan Men's Health Center. And the date was 3 years before we'd even met. Before he'd swept me off my feet with talk of building a life together. Before he'd nodded sympathetically every time I mentioned wanting children. My hands were shaking as I opened it, and honestly, they should have been. Vasectomy consultation and procedure confirmation. Voluntary sterilization completed successfully. Patient counseled on permanence of procedure. Let that sink in for a moment. My husband had me believing I was broken, while he'd literally made sure we could never have children. The audacity was almost impressive. The envelope slipped from my numb fingers like a smoking gun. For a moment, I just stood there in Christian's office, staring at the evidence scattered across his mahogany desk. 3 years before he'd met me. 3 years before he'd swept me off my feet with promises of forever. 3 years before he'd let me believe that my body was somehow failing us both. Every conversation about our future family had been a performance worthy of an Oscar. Every time I'd suggested baby names or pointed out cute nursery furniture, he'd been acting. This man had built our entire relationship on a foundation of lies so elaborate it would make politicians jealous. I photographed the documents with my phone, my hands still trembling with a combination of rage and vindication. Then I carefully returned everything to its exact position in the safe. Because if Christian thought he was the only one who could play the long game, he was about to get a very rude awakening. The next few weeks were pure torture. I sat across from Christian at dinner, making small talk about his day, while inside I was screaming loud enough to wake the dead. I watched him chat with Marcus about their latest business ventures, and suddenly, their relationship took on a completely different dimension. Had Marcus known about the vasectomy? Was he part of this elaborate deception too? Of course he was. You don't share a dorm room, start a business, and maintain a decades-long friendship without knowing your partner's medical history, especially when that medical history directly impacts the woman he's married to. You seem distracted lately, doesn't she? Christian observed one evening, not looking up from his tablet as he scrolled through emails, playing the caring husband he pretended to be. Just tired, I replied, wondering how he could be so oblivious to the fact that I'd uncovered his lies. But then again, Christian had always been excellent at seeing only what he wanted to see. It's a useful skill when you're living a double life. The final piece of the puzzle fell into place during a dinner party we hosted for some of Christian's business associates. I was playing the perfect hostess, as always, when I noticed something that made my blood run cold. Marcus was adjusting Christian's tie, an intimate gesture that lasted just a beat too long. Their eyes met, and in that moment, I saw something that explained absolutely everything. Love. Not friendship, not business partnership, but genuine, deep, romantic love. I excused myself to the kitchen and gripped the marble countertop until my knuckles turned white. How long had they been together? Had their relationship started in college, or was it something that developed over years of building their business empire? More importantly, why had Christian married me if he was in love with someone else? The answer was probably sitting right there in that manila envelope, wasn't it? The vasectomy. The marriage to a woman who desperately wanted children. The prenuptial agreement I'd signed without reading carefully because I'd been blinded by love and expensive jewelry. It all added up to something calculated and cruel. Christian had married me as a cover. A beautiful, successful wife to parade around while he lived his real life with Marcus. And when our childless marriage inevitably failed because I couldn't get pregnant, he'd be able to keep his fortune intact while playing the victim of a defective woman who couldn't give him the heir he wanted. It was actually brilliant in a completely sociopathic way. I almost had to admire the planning involved. Almost. I started doing research like my life depended on it, because frankly, it did. Real research, not just connecting dots and drawing conclusions like some discount detective. I hired a private investigator, a woman named Detective Sarah Chen, who specialized in matrimonial cases and had the kind of track record that suggested she'd seen every flavor of marital deception imaginable. I paid her with money from an account Christian didn't know about, a small inheritance from my grandmother that I'd kept separate from our joint finances. Because apparently I had better instincts about protecting myself than I'd given myself credit for. I need to know if my husband is having an affair, I told Sarah during our first meeting at a coffee shop in Queens, far from anywhere Christian or Marcus might accidentally stumble upon us. Sarah was in her 40s, sharp-eyed and professional, with a kind of no-nonsense attitude I wished I'd possessed 3 years ago. Most wives have a gut feeling before they have proof, she said, studying me across the small table. What's yours telling you? That my marriage has been a lie from day one, and I'm about to prove it. She nodded like she'd heard this story 1,000 times before, which was either reassuring or deeply depressing. Give me 3 weeks. If there's something to find, I'll find it. Those 3 weeks were the longest of my life. I had to continue playing the devoted wife, while inside, I was building a case for my own liberation. Christian noticed nothing different about my behavior, which honestly told me everything I needed to know about how much attention he'd ever paid to his actual wife versus his imaginary perfect spouse. Summer seems a bit off lately, doesn't she? I overheard Marcus ask Christian one evening when they thought I was upstairs, because apparently my husband discussed my emotional state with his boyfriend, but not with me. She's probably just hormonal, Christian replied dismissively. You know how women get. Hormonal. After 3 years of marriage, that was his clinical analysis of my emotional state. Not concerned that his wife might be unhappy. Not worried that something might be wrong. Just hormonal. Like I was some kind of unpredictable weather pattern that occasionally produced storms. I wanted to march into that room and show them both exactly how hormonal I could get. But patience was about to pay off in ways they couldn't imagine. Sarah called me on a Tuesday morning while Christian was at the gym with Marcus, their daily routine that I'd never questioned before, but now seemed like the perfect cover for whatever they were really doing during those 2-hour workouts. We need to meet, she said simply. I have what you're looking for. The photographs were absolutely damning. Christian and Marcus leaving a hotel in Midtown, not the kind of place you'd go for a business meeting, unless your business involved king-sized beds and room service. Christian and Marcus at a restaurant in the village, holding hands across the table like the lovers they obviously were. Christian and Marcus kissing in the doorway of Marcus's apartment building at midnight, when Christian had told me he was working late at the office. How long? I asked, staring at the evidence of my husband's double life spread across the table like playing cards in the world's worst poker game. From what I can tell, at least since college. Maybe longer. They're very careful, very discreet. But there are patterns. Hotel registrations under Marcus's name, restaurant reservations for 2 in locations where they're unlikely to run into anyone from their professional circle. Your husband has been living a double life for a very long time. I felt strangely calm as I absorbed this information. The betrayal was complete now. No more wondering. No more second-guessing my instincts. No more making excuses for behavior that had never made sense. Christian had married me to hide his relationship with Marcus, undergone a vasectomy to ensure I'd never get pregnant, and created the perfect trap to ensure I'd walk away from our divorce with nothing. Except he'd made one crucial miscalculation. He'd underestimated his wife. I want a divorce, I announced on a Thursday evening, standing in the doorway of Christian's office while he reviewed quarterly reports. I'd rehearsed this moment for weeks, but my voice still came out stronger and clearer than I'd expected. Christian didn't even look up from his laptop because why would he? I was just his wife. Don't be dramatic, Summer. Whatever's bothering you, we can discuss it rationally, like adults. There's nothing to discuss. I want out of this marriage. That got his attention. He finally lifted his head, and I saw calculation flicker in his eyes before his eye expression settled into what I'd learned to recognize as his negotiation face, the same one he used with difficult clients who didn't understand how lucky they were to have his expertise. Summer, let's not make any hasty decisions. Marriage is work, and we both need to put in more effort. Effort? I laughed, and it sounded harsh even to my own ears. Christian, when's the last time you touched me? When's the last time we had a real conversation about anything that mattered? When's the last time you treated me like a wife instead of an expensive accessory that looks good at company parties? He stood up, moving around his desk with the kind of predatory grace that had once made my heart race, and now just made me angry. You're being emotional. This is exactly the kind of reaction that makes productive communication impossible. I'm done communicating. I filed the papers. You'll be served tomorrow morning. The mask slipped then, just for a moment, and I saw something cold and calculating in his expression. The real Christian, the one who'd planned this entire charade from the beginning. You might want to reconsider that decision, Summer. Remember our prenuptial agreement? You signed away quite a lot of rights when you were so eager to become Mrs. Morrison. There it was. The threat I'd been expecting. The reminder that he held all the financial power, that he'd structured our marriage to ensure I'd be left with nothing if I ever tried to leave. Christian had always been thorough in his planning. It was one of the qualities I'd once admired about him. I remember, I said calmly. I also remember the clause about fault-based divorce and the provision for spousal support in cases of adultery or fraud. His confidence wavered slightly, like a crack appearing in expensive marble. I don't know what you think you know, but I know about Marcus. The words hung in the air between us like a live wire, crackling with dangerous energy. Christian's face went completely blank. That expressionless mask he wore when he was calculating his next move in a high-stakes negotiation. I don't know what you mean by that. Of course you don't. I turned to leave, then paused in the doorway for my exit line. Oh, and Christian? You might want to call your lawyer. You're going to need the best legal team money can buy. Trust me on this one. The divorce proceedings were exactly as brutal as I'd expected. Christian hired the most expensive legal team in the city, men in $1,000 suits who specialized in protecting wealthy men from their inconvenient wives. They filed motion after motion, questioning my mental state, my financial contributions to the marriage, my fitness as a spouse. But they made one crucial mistake. They assumed I was the same naive woman who'd signed that prenuptial agreement 3 years ago. The preliminary hearing was scheduled for a Tuesday morning in family court. I arrived early, dressed in a navy suit that projected competence and respectability. Christian's lawyers had requested a closed hearing. Somehow the media had gotten wind of the case. Morrison Investment Group was well known in financial circles, and wealthy men's messy divorces always made excellent copy. Christian arrived with his legal team and Marcus, who was there as moral support and business partner. They huddled together at their table, whispering strategies and shooting confident glances in my direction like they were planning a hostile takeover. I sat alone with my lawyer, a smart woman named Jennifer Walsh, who specialized in David versus Goliath cases and had never lost to a Goliath yet. Are you ready for this? Jennifer asked quietly. I patted my purse, feeling the weight of the manila envelope inside. I've been ready for months. The hearing began with Christian's lawyer painting him as the devoted husband whose wife had become increasingly unstable and demanding. They presented our prenuptial agreement with the flourish of magicians pulling rabbits from hats, highlighting the clause that would leave me with minimal assets if our marriage ended due to my inability to provide children. My client entered this marriage with the express understanding that he and Mrs. Morrison would start a family, his lawyer ended, like he was delivering a eulogy. When it became clear that Mrs. Morrison was unable to fulfill this essential aspect of their marital agreement, the relationship deteriorated beyond repair. Unable to fulfill. The word choice was deliberate, designed to make me sound defective, broken, less than a real woman. I felt every eye in that courtroom assessing me, wondering what was wrong with me that I couldn't give my husband the child he wanted. It was actually quite a performance. I almost believed it myself. But then Christian's lawyer made his fatal mistake. He looked directly at me with that smug smile that said he thought he'd already won. Furthermore, Your Honor, medical evidence will show that Mrs. Morrison is in fact infertile. My client has endured 3 years of false hope, while his wife concealed her condition, making conception impossible. The silence in that courtroom was deafening. You could have heard a pin drop as Judge Harrison stared at Christian, waiting for an explanation that wasn't coming. Christian's face had gone from confident to pale to green in about 30 seconds. Quite the transformation for someone who usually controlled every room he entered. Your Honor, I said, standing up despite Jennifer's surprised look. I have evidence I'd like to present to the court. I walked to the judge's bench, my heels clicking on the marble floor like a countdown timer, and placed that beautiful manila envelope in his hands. The courtroom was silent except for the rustle of paper as he opened it and examined the contents. The vasectomy records, the private investigator's photographs, bank statements showing hotel charges and restaurant bills for Christian's secret dates with Marcus. Phone records documenting late-night calls between them while Christian was supposedly working late. Judge Harrison's expression grew darker as he reviewed each piece of evidence. Finally, he looked up, his gaze moving from Christian to Marcus to me, like he was watching the world's most expensive tennis match. "Mr. Morrison," he said, his voice carrying the weight of judicial authority and barely contained disgust. "Would you care to explain these documents?" Christian's lawyer jumped up like his chair was on fire. "Your Honor, we weren't prepared to address these allegations today. We request a continuance to properly review these documents and prepare our response." "Allegations?" Judge Harrison's eyebrows shot up as he held up one of the photographs. "This appears to be your client kissing another man outside an apartment building. Are you suggesting this is somehow fabricated? I watched Christian's world crumble in real time. And honestly, I should probably feel guilty about how satisfying it was. But after 3 years of being made to feel like I was the problem, like I was broken and insufficient, watching him squirm felt like justice served with a side of karma." Marcus had gone completely white and was staring at his hands like they held the secrets of the universe. The man who'd been so comfortable playing the concerned business partner was suddenly very interested in the floor tiles. "Your Honor," Jennifer stood up. "These documents clearly show that Mr. Morrison has been living a double life throughout his marriage to my client. The vasectomy records prove he never intended to have children, making his claims about my client's alleged infertility not just false, but deliberately fraudulent." The judge flipped through more photographs, his expression growing more disgusted by the minute. This court has seen many cases of marital deception, but this level of premeditation is particularly disturbing. Mr. Morrison appears to have deliberately married Mrs. Morrison as a cover for his relationship with— Judge Harrison glanced at his notes. "Marcus DeLuca. Then structured their prenuptial agreement to ensure she would receive nothing when the inevitable divorce occurred due to his own voluntary sterilization." Christian finally found his voice, though it came out as more of a croak. "Your Honor, my relationship with Marcus is purely professional." "Mr. Morrison," the judge's voice was ice cold, "I strongly advise you not to commit perjury in my courtroom. The evidence before me suggests otherwise, and I've seen enough court cases to recognize a lie when I hear one." The media section was frantically scribbling notes. I could already see tomorrow's headlines. "Investment mogul's secret life. Exposed. Millionaire's marriage was elaborate fraud." Christian's carefully constructed public image was disintegrating faster than a sandcastle in a hurricane, and I had front row seats to the show. "In light of this evidence," Judge Harrison continued, "I'm ruling that the prenuptial agreement is void due to fraud. Mrs. Morrison entered this contract under false pretenses, believing she was marrying a man who shared her desire for children, when in fact, Mr. Morrison had deliberately made conception impossible." Christian's lawyer looked like he'd been slapped with a wet fish. "Your Honor, we respectfully request. Furthermore," the judge's voice cut through the courtroom like a blade, "I'm awarding Mrs. Morrison 50% of all marital assets, including the primary residence, vacation properties, and a substantial portion of Morrison Investment Group. 50% of everything, including the penthouse where I'd spent 3 years feeling like a stranger. The Hamptons house where I'd hosted countless parties for his friends and business associates. And most importantly, a controlling interest in the company that had been Christian and Marcus's baby." Christian shot to his feet like he'd been electrocuted. "Your Honor, that's impossible. The company is my life's work, and which you built during your marriage using community property laws," Judge Harrison replied coolly. "Your wife was entitled to transparency about your intentions and fertility status. Instead, you committed fraud on a scale that shocks this court's conscience." I could practically see the dollar signs evaporating from Christian's eyes. The man who thought he was so clever, so careful in his planning, had just lost everything because he'd underestimated the woman he'd married for appearances. It was almost poetic. The aftermath of that courtroom victory was swift and brutal. Within 48 hours, news of Christian's deception had spread through Manhattan's financial district like wildfire. The story had everything gossip-hungry socialites loved: secret affairs, financial fraud, and a wealthy man's spectacular downfall. Christian's business associates started distancing themselves immediately. Nobody wanted to be associated with a man who'd committed marriage fraud, especially not in a world where reputation was everything. Phone calls went unreturned. Lunch invitations were rescinded. And suddenly, Christian found himself persona non grata in the very circles where he'd once held court. Marcus bore the brunt of the professional fallout. Their investors, already nervous about the scandal, began pulling their money when they realized the company's two founding partners had been living a lie that made soap operas look understated. The man who'd helped build Morrison Investment Group from the ground up was suddenly toxic by association. I moved back into the penthouse while Christian packed his belongings like a defeated general retreating from battle. The irony wasn't lost on me. The woman he'd tried to leave with nothing was now living in his home, surrounded by the art and furniture he'd chosen to impress people who no longer answered his calls. "This isn't over, Summer," he said on his last day, standing in our former living room with boxes of his personal items stacked around him like the ruins of his former empire. "You think you've won something, but you have no idea how to run a business. You'll lose everything within a year." I was sitting in his favorite leather chair, the one where he used to read financial reports while ignoring me. "You know what's funny, Christian? You spent 3 years treating me like I was too stupid to notice your lies. Too dependent on you to survive on my own. And yet, here we are." The penthouse felt different once Christian was gone. Larger somehow, like it could finally breathe without his suffocating presence. I walked through rooms that had felt like a museum and started making them actually mine. The first thing I did was donate his precious art collection, every pretentious piece he bought to show off his sophisticated taste, to the Metropolitan Museum of Art. Let them deal with his legacy while I built my own. Jennifer Walsh, my lawyer, became my advisor as I navigated the complex process of taking control of Morrison Investment Group. The company was hemorrhaging clients and money like a sinking ship, but the bones of it were solid. Christian and Marcus had built something valuable, even if they'd destroyed its reputation with their personal drama. "You have two choices," Jennifer explained during one of our strategy sessions. "Sell your shares and walk away with enough money to buy a small island, or fight to rebuild the company's reputation and potentially make even more money in the long run." I thought about that for exactly 30 seconds. I didn't go through all this just to take the easy way out. Besides, I want to prove that this company can succeed without them. The first board meeting I attended as a major shareholder was memorable in all the best ways. These men, who'd known me only as Christian's decorative wife, suddenly had to take me seriously as a business owner. The adjustment was painful for everyone involved, but mostly for them. "Mrs. Morrison," one of the board members said carefully, like he was defusing a bomb, "we appreciate your enthusiasm, but managing an investment firm requires specialized knowledge and experience." "You're absolutely right," I agreed with a smile that could have cut glass. "Which is why I'm bringing in consultants and advisors to help guide the transformation. But make no mistake, I'm not going anywhere. This is my company now." Rebuilding Morrison Investment Group's reputation was like performing surgery on a patient who was bleeding out on the operating table. Every day brought new challenges: clients threatening to leave, employees uncertain about their futures, competitors circling like vultures waiting to pick apart our remaining assets. But I had advantages that Christian never possessed. I understood people in ways he never bothered to learn. While he'd focused on numbers and profits, I'd spent years managing relationships, reading social dynamics, understanding what people really wanted versus what they said they wanted. Turns out those skills are surprisingly useful in business. My first major decision was rebranding. Morrison Investment Group became Meridian Capital Partners, a fresh start with no baggage from Christian's scandal. I hired a crisis management team, a new marketing firm, and most importantly, I brought in Rebecca Torres as CEO. Rebecca was everything I wasn't: financial expertise, 15 years of experience running investment firms, and a reputation for turning around struggling companies. She was also a woman in a male-dominated industry who understood exactly what it felt like to be underestimated by men in expensive suits. "Why me?" she asked during our first meeting. "You could hire any number of experienced executives who'd probably work for less money and fewer questions." "Because you know what it's like to have everyone assume you don't belong in the room," I said. "And because when I researched your track record, I realized you're exactly the kind of person Christian would never have hired. Which makes you perfect for what we're trying to build." Rebecca smiled at that. "You want to prove that the company can succeed without him." "I want to prove it can succeed better without him." The first 6 months were brutal in ways I hadn't anticipated. We lost about 40% of our client base, had to lay off a third of our staff, And there were days when I wondered if Christian had been right about my ability to run a business. But slowly, gradually, we started attracting new clients who were intrigued by our story. Turns out there were a lot of people who enjoyed the idea of investing with a company that had been built from the ashes of a fraud scandal. We marketed ourselves as transparent, ethical, and led by people who understood the real cost of deception. It was a compelling narrative, and more importantly, it worked. Marcus tried to reach out to me once, about 8 months after the divorce was finalized. He called my office, somehow got past my assistant, and caught me during a late evening when I was reviewing quarterly reports and wondering if I'd bitten off more than I could chew. "Summer, I wanted to apologize," he said, his voice heavy with guilt. That was probably genuine. "I never meant for you to get hurt in all this." "But you knew I would be," I replied calmly, setting down my pen and leaning back in my chair. "You knew Christian had married me under false pretenses. Knew he'd undergone a vasectomy. Knew he was planning to leave me with nothing when our childless marriage inevitably failed. You knew all of that, and you participated anyway." "I love him," Marcus said simply, like that explained everything and absolved him of all responsibility. "I know you do. But love doesn't excuse cruelty, Marcus. And what you both did to me was incredibly cruel. It was calculated, deliberate, and designed to destroy my life for your convenience." He was quiet for a long moment. "For what it's worth, I think Christian underestimated you from the beginning. He saw what he wanted to see, someone he could control and manipulate. He never saw how strong you really are." "No," I agreed. "He didn't. And that was his biggest mistake." 2 years after the divorce, Meridian Capital Partners wasn't just surviving. We were thriving in ways that would have made Christian's head spin. Our client portfolio had grown by 300%. We'd opened offices in Chicago and Los Angeles, and Rebecca had been featured on the cover of Financial Weekly as one of the industry's rising stars. But my real triumph came on a Tuesday morning when my assistant buzzed my office with unusual excitement in her voice. "Miss Morrison, you have a visitor. A Mr. David Chen from Chen & Associates. He says it's about a business proposition that you'll find very interesting." David Chen turned out to be Sarah's brother, the private investigator who'd helped me gather evidence against Christian. Unlike his sister, David was a corporate acquisition specialist who made his living buying and selling struggling companies like some kind of business vulture. "I have something I think you'll want to see," he said, sliding a folder across my desk with the satisfaction of someone delivering excellent news. "Morrison Investment Group is going up for sale." I opened the folder and felt a smile spread across my face that probably looked borderline predatory. Christian and Marcus's original company, the one they'd lost most of their clients and investors after the scandal, was now bleeding money and desperately seeking a buyer. The asking price was a fraction of what the company had been worth during its heyday. "They're asking $12 million, David explained, based on their remaining assets and client contracts. It's actually a decent deal for someone who knows how to turn around a damaged brand. $12 million, pocket change compared to what I'd walked away with from the divorce settlement. More importantly, it would give me the chance to complete the circle, to own the company that Christian had built his entire identity around. There's one more thing," David added with a grin that suggested he enjoyed his work as much as I was about to enjoy mine. "They don't know you're the potential buyer. I've been representing you through a shell company. So as far as they know, they're selling to anonymous investors." The thought of Christian's face when he realized who was buying his life's work was almost too delicious to contemplate. Almost. The acquisition went through without a hitch, smoother than Christian's lies had once seemed. Morrison Investment Group officially became a subsidiary of Meridian Capital Partners. And with it came something I hadn't expected, closure that felt better than any therapy session. Christian called me the day the sale was finalized. I was in my office looking out at the Manhattan skyline and thinking about how much my life had changed when my phone rang with his number. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity won. "Summer?" His voice was flat, defeated, stripped of all the confidence that had once made him so attractive. "I just found out who bought the company." "Congratulations on the sale," I said pleasantly, like I was talking to any other business acquaintance. "I hear you got a fair price, considering the circumstances and the company's current reputation." "Why?" The question came out raw, angry like a wounded animal. "You've already taken everything from me." "Why this too?" "I didn't take anything from you, Christian. I simply stopped letting you take from me." I leaned back in my chair, feeling oddly peaceful about this conversation. You built that company during our marriage using community property. By law, I was always entitled to half of it. Now I own all of it, fair and square. You don't understand what that company meant to me. I understand perfectly. It was your identity, your proof of worth, your legacy. Just like our marriage was supposed to be my identity, my proof of worth, my legacy. The difference is you tried to destroy mine while building yours on lies. I'm rebuilding yours with honesty. He was quiet for so long I thought he'd hung up. Finally, he said, "What are you going to do with it?" Turn it into something that doesn't require fraud to succeed. The integration of Morrison Investment Group into Meridian Capital Partners took 6 months of careful planning. We kept the best employees, the most valuable client relationships, and the solid investment strategies that had made the company successful in the first place. Everything else, the toxic culture, the old boys network, the casual arrogance that had enabled Christian's deception, we scrapped completely. But the real surprise came when I discovered just how deep Christian's financial troubles had become. The man who'd once controlled millions was now struggling to make ends meet, like some kind of financial pauper. His reputation in the financial world was destroyed. His personal brand was toxic, and the divorce settlement had left him with far less than he'd anticipated. Marcus had fared slightly better, but only because he'd had the sense to distance himself from Christian once the scandal broke. He'd moved to California, started a small consulting firm, and was slowly rebuilding his career under a lower profile. Smart man, even if his taste in partners was questionable. As for me, I was living in the penthouse that had once felt like a prison, running companies that generated more revenue than Christian had ever dreamed of. And for the first time in years, I felt like I could actually breathe. But the story doesn't end with professional success and financial revenge, because apparently life had more surprises in store for me. I was at a charity gala, the kind of event I'd attended dozens of times as Christian's arm candy, when I met Dr. James Mitchell. He was a pediatric surgeon at Mount Sinai, recently divorced himself, and refreshingly unimpressed by my business success or social status. "So, you're the woman who brought down Morrison Investment Group," he said when we were introduced, his tone more curious than judgmental. "I'm the woman who survived Morrison Investment Group," I corrected. "There's a difference." He studied me with intelligent gray eyes that reminded me of storm clouds. "I imagine there is. That must have taken incredible strength." It was the first time in years that someone had acknowledged what I'd been through, rather than just focusing on what I had gained from it. Most people saw the penthouse, the successful company, the financial victory, and assumed I'd come out ahead. James was the first person to recognize that surviving that level of deception and betrayal had required something deeper than just good lawyers and determination. We talked for 3 hours at that gala, long after the formal program had ended and most guests had gone home. He told me about his work saving children's lives, about his own messy divorce from a woman who'd wanted a doctor's salary but not a doctor's schedule. I told him about building a company from the ashes of a fraudulent marriage, about learning to trust my instincts after years of being gaslighted by a professional. "Would you like to have dinner sometime?" he asked as the evening wound down. "Somewhere quiet where we can continue this conversation without 100 people pretending not to eavesdrop." I almost said no. After everything I'd been through with Christian, the idea of trusting another man felt about as appealing as voluntary root canal surgery. But something about James felt different, genuine in a way that Christian had never been, even during his most convincing performances. "I should probably warn you," I said. "I come with a lot of baggage, public scandal, trust issues, an ex-husband who committed marriage fraud, and a tendency to investigate people's backgrounds before the second date." James smiled, and it was nothing like Christian's practiced charm. This was warm, real, unguarded. I come with emergency surgery schedules, a tendency to disappear into work for 12-hour stretches, and an ex-wife who tells anyone who'll listen that I chose my career over our marriage. "Want to compare baggage over dinner on Friday?" I realized I was smiling back, the first genuine smile I'd felt in longer than I could remember. "That sounds perfect." 6 months later, I was standing in the bathroom of my penthouse, staring at a pregnancy test with 2 pink lines, feeling emotions I couldn't quite name. After everything Christian had put me through. The years of thinking I was broken. The public humiliation in court. The cruel irony of being called sterile by a man who'd made himself sterile. I was pregnant. James and I had been taking things slowly, building trust and intimacy in ways I'd never experienced with Christian. He'd been patient with my anxiety about commitment, understanding about my need for independence, and amazingly supportive of my business endeavors. When I told him about wanting children someday, he'd simply said, "Someday sounds good to me. When you're ready." Apparently, someday had arrived sooner than either of us expected. "Summer?" James called from the bedroom. "Everything okay in there?" I opened the bathroom door, still holding the test, still trying to process this turn of events. James took one look at my face, then at the test in my hands, and his expression shifted from concern to wonder. "Are you—" he started, then stopped, waiting for me to tell him how I felt about this news before he revealed his own reaction. "I'm pregnant," I said, the words feeling surreal. After all of Christian's lies about me being infertile, after believing for years that I might never be able to have children, I'm actually pregnant. James crossed the room in 2 steps and wrapped me in his arms, careful and gentle, like he was afraid I might break. "How do you feel about it?" "Terrified," I admitted. "Excited. Vindication. Like the universe has a sense of humor and excellent timing." When Emma Rose Mitchell was born on a snowy Tuesday morning in February, weighing 7 pounds and 2 ounces with a full head of dark hair and her father's determined chin, I finally understood what true victory looked like. It wasn't the financial success, wasn't the professional recognition, wasn't even the satisfaction of watching Christian's empire crumble. True victory was holding my daughter in my arms, knowing that I'd survived everything that had tried to break me, and emerged stronger, wiser, and infinitely more capable of love than I'd ever thought possible. James proposed when Emma was 6 months old, not with a massive diamond designed to impress other people, but with his grandmother's simple gold band and a promise that he'd spend his life being worthy of the trust I'd placed in him. We married in a small ceremony in the garden of the penthouse, surrounded by the people who'd supported me through the darkest period of my life. As for Christian and Marcus, they weren't invited, obviously. I'd heard they'd moved to Portland, where Marcus was running a small investment advisory firm, and Christian was working as a mid-level analyst. They were together, finally living openly as a couple, but their professional reputations had never recovered. Sometimes the best revenge really is living well. And I was living very, very well indeed. So, tell me, if you were in my shoes facing that kind of calculated betrayal, what would have been your first move? How do you think you would have fought back? Let me know in the comments below.